this, or 1864, yes. Oh, so tomorrow I do give pretty good extra credit. You can dress up as these people. Tobias Funke. He's the blue man. No, you can't dress up as, you can dress up as John C. Calhoun. I didn't say it right. I'll save it for another time. I'll surprise you with it. Fluoride Calhoun, Ambrose Burnside. Please shave your head. Think about it. Shave your head. It's December. It's cold, right? If you have no hair on your head, the heat can get to your skull faster and you feel warmer. That's science. Yeah, I know. You can also dress up as Claire Barch or Frederick Douglass, or, oh, I did say, if you want to make the Friedling-Huizing clay red, white, and blue outfit from 1850 or 1844, I'll let you. So that's what you dress up, and I give pretty significant extra credit if you put some effort in it. AKA shave your head. No, I gave 2 years ago we had somebody, she did half Burnside. She had kind of one of those bald caps, and then half Calhoun with her hair like that, and had it split right down the middle. With a uniform on one side. No, I said, you have to pick one. but she looked really good, but she also said that was the most uncomfortable she'd ever been in her life. She had the makeup on, it was just looking good. All right, so tomorrow there'll be no quiz. The test 4 multiple choice, I think like 15 matching and some, or 4 short ID, 15 multiple choice, and I think like 15 matching. And then we'll have a normal day in class on Friday. There are some things I'm going to assign over Festivus for the rest of us. And I'll talk more about Festivus. It is, as we all know, it is a holiday that you need aluminum, no tinsel, right? And I will show the documentary, and I'll tell you more about that tomorrow, because we have a 45-minute lunch on Friday. Oh, the bad part about lunch is after this period. I know, so you guys are going to be hungry.
Tomorrow?
So let's go and get going. We got the 1864. Let's go and finish this. By the way, did I show you this picture? So I didn't show you this? My great-great-great-grandfather's monument. It's his personal monument, aka the 28th. Ohio. Okay, so 1864. Did we get to this at all? So, the South and Jefferson Davis, what he had to deal with. I put Davis out, but what I really mean is the South. And the strategy now by default was hold out. Now, that was a strategy for the whole war, but they kind of blew it at Gettysburg losing. It was like, looking back, it was pure folly to invade. Now they got to hold out to the election in the North. The United States is going to do something unheard of. They're going to have an election for their leader, for the executive, during a civil war. Pretty risky. Because if he loses, that's basically a vote against the war. But Davis turned out to be a very bad president. He refused to compromise. He couldn't persuade the southern states to do anything. And that ties into one more big issue. The southern states were really disunified. And Davis's personality turned them off. States like North Carolina refused to help. If you run a country based upon states' rights, the states might just do what they want. The Confederacy was inherently weak. But there's also a lot of Union sentiment. Western Virginia would be broken off by the U.S. in 1863 to create the state of West Virginia. It almost happened in eastern Tennessee. Northern Alabama revolted against the Confederacy, but they beat them back. But that's supposed to be Davis as Richard III, King of England, killed during the War of the Roses. Great Shakespearean play. And the other thing is they had no real financial system. All they could do was print Confederate, it's called script or currency, but they didn't really have a power to tax. And without the power to tax, I'll bring you down. I agree. That help? Well, eventually if you get numb, yeah, I'm making you tougher. So with that, if a country does not have a power to tax effectively, they can't control the value of their currency. And that's what happened here. Prices skyrocketed. By the end of 1864, in Richmond, Virginia, food was so short and money was so worthless that the inflation rate was 100% a day. Prices were doubling every day, meaning that money was worthless. Yet they're holding on to that election, and it almost happened. In the North, Lincoln's problems was, first off, let's get to, he had 3 successes I'll do first. 3 laws that the Republicans want they could pass during the war because there's no Southern representatives. Homestead Act, 160 acres for small farmers in the West. Morrill Act for state universities for agriculture, like Montana State University. Could be other things too. Also money and land for transcontinental railroad. Big Republican initiatives could be passed, but you had to win the war. And they had other huge problems. They had to issue a lot of bonds. That means debt was going up. And this was at a time, for the most part, the bondholders wanted gold. And there's a finite amount of gold. They'll discover many times over the next 60 years what a bad system the gold standard is. Also, they too have inflation. And put down for inflation, write down demand. The army and the government demanded everything: food, clothing, all the iron goods, all the transportation. That meant for people at home in the North, they had to spend top dollar because the army was buying it all. And if demand goes up, prices go up. Also, to pay for it, they started issuing currency called greenbacks. It was called the Legal Tender Act. And this wasn't technically based upon gold. It was complex. They had a very hackneyed system. And this is an anti-Lincoln cartoon, as in chuckling as they print more and more of this paper money, implying that's going to destroy the economy. And we'll talk a little bit more about, when we get to a different time in history, what they mean by that. But they just happen to have a shortage of green ink, or I'm sorry, a surplus of green ink. Thus, the money was green. That's why money's green. Today, they just kept it going. But this is currency. Their economy was better, but they're growing tired of the war. Just like the South, they too were disunified. The Democratic Party, which was almost as big as the Republican Party in the South, there were more Democrats than Republicans. I wish you guys would. Okay, every once in a while you see somebody just kind of randomly running up there. That's what the heck happened. No one's in my tree. Okay. Democrats who wanted peace. They called themselves peace Democrats, but to signify them, they wore a penny, a copper penny, and they had either a Lady Liberty or they call them literally Indian head pennies for the end of, from 1860 to the end of the century. So they called them copperheads, because they wore a copper penny. But Republicans soon would dub them copperheads as in they're snakes. They can't be trusted. And they wanted peace, which means a Confederate victory. They weren't necessarily, to their point of view, disloyal, but they thought there could be a Confederacy. The most famous would be, oh, by the way, snakes. You can't trust snakes. Do you agree? Does anyone here trust snakes? You ever watch them move? There's something wrong with snakes. Okay, moving on. Clement Vallandigham would be the most famous of the copperheads from Ohio. And he, to Lincoln's point of view, was treasonous. So he was a member of Congress, and violating the Constitution, Lincoln had him arrested, and he exiled him to the Confederacy. And at first the Confederacy was like, yay, we got this Northern who hates Lincoln. But then, well, they didn't like Vallandigham either. They ended up exiling him to Canada, and then he just kind of showed back up in Ohio. But the point about this is that the North was disunified. We already had the New York draft riots in that video. And so it really did look like the whole thing was falling apart. I mean, they're on the edge of creating a brand new country, but the United States has got to win. And I didn't write this down, but get this down what the strategy of the North is. They have to look like they're winning. Look like they can win this war before what event? the election. If it looks like the war is going to keep dragging on, Lincoln will lose and the Confederacy wins, and the U.S. is done. At least as we know it. So with that, Lincoln finally chose Grant. Ulysses S. Grant would be the overall commander of the entire United States Army. So Henry Halleck would be demoted to like the chief of staff. And Grant, in fact, Lincoln had never met Grant until March of 1864 when he showed up in Washington, D.C. to take command. But Lincoln knew Grant fights. And Grant, despite he did have some drinking problems, he had been on a few benders at Vicksburg, but he was the best choice, and I love this picture. His job, by the election of 64, they got to win. But, this is a good picture, because it shows Grant, it's a picture of Grant getting his photo taken. So you see a number of things. First off, see the floor with these lines on it? So you can kind of like angle the shoulders to the right angle, and then see that to hold his head straight so it doesn't shake in the camera because of the exposure times. So that's a pretty good picture of it. It's right after he got his 3rd star. 3-star generals called a lieutenant general. He was the only lieutenant general in the U.S. Army. Washington was a lieutenant general, and they decided, well, we can only have Washington. So they had a bunch of 2-star or major generals. What's highest ranking general today? Anyone know? 4. Literally general. World War II, there were 5-star generals called General of the Army or Admiral of the Navy. And then one general in World War I, they gave him 6 stars, Pershing. That's never happened since. But back to him. He has a beard, and he always looks very burly to me. I don't know why you look at this picture like this big burly guy. He's actually small, slight, very good on a horse. And when he got there, one kind of quirk about him, he could not stand the sight of blood, which is pretty amazing considering what's about ready to happen. When he had like a steak cooked for him, it had to be burnt to a crisp, like charcoal. Who doesn't like charcoal? And in an army where there's music and marching and bands all the time, he was completely tone deaf. He knew 2 songs. One was Yankee Doodle, and the other wasn't. Meaning he knew 1 song. He knew Yankee Doodle, and the other one was some other song he could identify. So with that, Grant's idea, he's got to knock out, destroy the Confederate Army. He's got to do it. So in the Army of the West, which is now going to the East, they got to knock out the Confederate Army in front of Atlanta. And he'll leave his best and most trusted general, William Tecumseh Sherman, alone to handle that. He trusted Sherman. He didn't know Meade. And so the Army of the Potomac, which has to knock out Lee's army and take Richmond, knock out that army, Grant will go with Meade. So his headquarters rode with Meade. So Grant handled like the major operations, the big movements, and Meade handled all the day-to-day movements, and the tactical plans were Meade. Meade doesn't get enough credit. They always say it was Grant, but it was actually Meade and Grant, and they worked actually really well together, even though Meade was an old goggle-eyed, snappy gerbil. But before we get started on that, I know what a lot of you are thinking. I still need something with life. A lesson. And do we know what this lesson is going to be? Commas save lives. You want to see how? Life lessons. I'll give you more.
Why was that random?
Huh?
That's so random.
Life does not always come in a straight line. So it's that. There would be 3 other attempts, other big operations. Big one, take Mobile. Don't write these ones down. Just let's take Mobile, the Shenandoah Valley, and attack at a place called Petersburg. And they all failed. But the big thing is Meade, Sherman. So I do this one first. They all started in the first week of May when the spring rains died down. Hopefully the roads are dry enough to move. And so, the Eastern Theater, 1864. Northern Virginia's in ruin. Here's the Rappahannock. Here's the Rapidian. There's Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness. Meade's army was up here, about 110,000 men. Grant's with them. So Grant's basically ordering Meade which way to attack, and then Meade would do the actual battle operations. Lee, 55,000 men, they're out of men. They're now drafting men as young men, now as young as 16, and older men up to 40, and some of them they would eventually go up to 50. They're literally running out of men. So they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. So, Meade, Lee. And Meade was going to get down here as quick as possible into open territory. Lee would not let him and attacked him right here for a 2.5-day horrific battle called the Battle of the Wilderness. And it was on the old Chancellorsville battle site, the Battle of the Wilderness. And this is a cavalry action where Confederate cavalry attacked Union cavalry on the flank. It's a really confusing battle because there's so many trees and forests. It's a really rugged area. And in two different spots, for example, up in the north, Union forces almost broke the Confederate back. And in the south, Confederates almost split the Union forces into two. I mean, it's just a really confusing, bloody battle. Along this line right here, Union soldiers dug trenches, and many of them were in the relatively recent, hastily dug graves from Chancellorsville. So that just made it even more awful. This battle was one of nightmares. The men who talked about this said this was one of the most scary because they couldn't see anything because of the terrain. It was so bitter, the fighting, the casualties were so high, but the worst was the night of the 6th and the 7th. It was a relatively dry spring, and black powder, you think about the cannon all firing, caught the forest on fire. And thousands of wounded men were trapped in the fire, and they couldn't see them at night. And that's what they talked about after the battle. Here's a sketch of them, makeshift stretcher Union soldiers trying to get a wounded man out. And they could hear the cries and then screams of terror of wounded men who couldn't escape the fire or couldn't move fast enough. And they couldn't find them. And that's what they talked about for years afterwards, the screams. Added to the hell of this battle. And it's one of these things, just a terrible battle. It was not a decisive winner, but the Confederates had only 13,000 casualties, and the Union only had 18,000. Only. That's over 31,000 casualties. Another bloodbath. A slight Confederate victory, maybe? Well, what's happened in every one of these battles? And you don't need to know the exact numbers. I'm just trying to give you how bloody these things were. After the battle, what has happened time after time, on the night of the 7th, the Union Army would march back. And they go back north, go into camp. There'll be another battle in 2 weeks or 2 months. You wait 2 months, drill, go back to camp, and then fight again. And that's what everybody assumed. All the Union Army assumed. In fact, they're like, well, Grant came here to take overall command, and he couldn't beat Lee in Virginia either. And so when the 1st Corps, actually the 6th Corps, but the first unit to move out, John Sedgwick, Uncle John, they started marching down this line in the middle of the night. In fact, they just had a few men with torches to light the path. When they got to this junction, everybody knew what that meant. In fact, Grant and Meade were on horseback when they got there, just kind of glowing in the torch light. If they turn left, that means they're going north, back into camp, and they'll fight again in 2 months, do it all over. But if they go right, start going this way, what does it mean they're going to do? They're going to try to get around Lee's army and fight again, maybe the next day. And it might be worse than in the wilderness, you never know. They all knew it. They assume they're going this way. But if they go right, more fighting tomorrow. So when they got to that, there was a staff member they got to that crossroads, a staff member from Meade's staff there. And all he did is he pointed south. Everybody knew what that meant. We're fighting again tomorrow. And what did the men do? They started cheering and throwing their hats in the air. They had to run down the line to shut them up because it was hinting to the Confederates. And a lot of them are going to be dead in the next couple of days. Why did they cheer? They knew that Grant's going to order them to finish the war. We're going to end it. We're going to finally get this thing done. And in fact, that was a big deal. They all knew Grant made that order to me. And they all knew, finally, here's a general, we're going to win this war. And we can go home. It's worth it. And I always find that amazing, but I also can understand that. Well, we're getting to something really important. It's something called interior lines. And I have to tell you about this because this is going to be a big factor in World War I, World War II. Huge factor. Interior lines of communication. So, I have to draw this for you, and I got the big guy out. Yeah. And a little red. We'll get the big one. So I'm going to draw you the Confederacy. Interior lines of communication. Now, once again, I know I'm showing off. I can't help it. But maybe someday. You ready for this? It's to scale, too. Everyone got it? This is to scale the Confederacy. Okay. There's the Confederacy, right? Here's Richmond. Yeah, I like brag. But yeah, there's Mobile. Okay, here's Washington, D.C. So here's the Union Army. They attack. The Confederates meet them, battle, draw. Like the wilderness. So if the Union Army wants to get around the Confederates, that means they have to back up a little bit. That kind of makes sense? You get to the next spot, they can attack here. But what do the Confederates have to do to get to that same spot? A straight line. They don't have to back up. So that means the Army on the defense, because of interior lines, has a huge advantage on defense. Because they can move faster because they have shorter distance. And this would be decisive, at least at first, for Lee. If he could beat Meade and Grant, they can dig in and hold out. And it's twofold. So these battles, Wilderness, and we're going to get to 4 more battles. Let's say they do this a couple more times. They're trying to beat them. And then we get this point. That makes sense? What happens to the supply lines? That's another big thing. What happens to the supply line of the attacker, aka the Union? The supply lines get longer and longer, and it's harder to fight. What happens to the Confederate supply lines? Same difference or even shorter. And so, has everyone got that? They can move faster on defense and have the advantage of supply lines. Even though the Confederates are almost out of supplies, they had less distance to go. I used to have a lot of these pins, and they kept breaking. That's the business coming, people. Okay, moving on. So, Grant knew he couldn't go this way because there's mountains. So, they went that way. Lee, he knew it. He figured it out. And the race is on to the next road junction. And Lee, because of interior lines, beat him. The place was, of course, Spotsylvania. And it says the battle from 8 to the 21st, but the battle was really 2 days, the 11th and 12th. He beat them there by just a few hours, about 8 hours. Confederates now learned real fast, dig trenches, fast. And that's what they did. The men got there, they dug, and they dug it like this. About 3 to 4 foot deep trench. They piled the dirt up, and then any break they had, they would cut down trees and put the logs up in that mound. So really good defensive work, called the breastworks, because it's right here. And they beat them. So Meade got there, and they looked for a place to attack. So there's a couple things about Spotsylvania. First off, what's the biggest problem with having a battle in a place like Spotsylvania? What's that? Yeah, vampires. You're absolutely right. Blood-sucking vampires. Correct? And what side are the vampires on? No. Neither side. Vampires know no loyalty. Here's a little life lesson. Write this down. Don't trust vampires. Yeah, you can't trust them. You think you can. They seem nice. They're not. Commas only kill vampires sometimes. So with that, next, to give you an idea of the ferocity of the fighting, General Sedgwick, okay, Spotsylvania, The biggest fight would be on May 12th, but General Sedgwick, John Sedgwick, right there, he arrived, the first major general to arrive. And when he got there, Confederate snipers were taking pot shots at him and his staff. Now, that means he's about 250 to 300 yards away. Now, black powder does not explode and ignite. It doesn't move the bullet very fast. So if you're going to shoot a black powder musket at someone 250 yards away, how do you have to point the gun, the rifle? About like that. You got to lob the shell in there. So you're not going to be very accurate. So when they rode up, bullets were just kind of hitting the dirt. You know, they're just kind of lobbing shells out there, bullets. Well, his staffers, they're kind of ducking and hiding. And Sedgwick, who is fearless, rode up, could not believe that. I kind of disgusted their hiding, and wanted to prove his courage. He rode up and kind of bucked them up. Rode up and said, "Man, you have nothing to fear. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance." He never finished the word. He was hit right in the head. And that is a bad omen for how awful Spotsylvania is going to be. Because when they got there, the Confederates built this long line, they called this the angle. They tried to find different places to attack. Well, in some areas, there was like 100 yards of clearing. And then in some areas, no more than 50 yards of clearing, and really heavy forests, hills. Couldn't find a place. They were probing. Well, a major commanding a regiment, about 400 men, his name was Emory Upton, came up with a plan. So let's say that's the Confederate line. The strategy was, that they'd line up in their lines, march at them, right? And what happened to the attacking army? Remember what happened at Spotsylvania? It happened at Fredericksburg, it happened at Gettysburg. Upton said, "Hey, I got a plan. Let's sneak up about the area where it's 50 yards away, so we hide in the forest. No preliminary attacks. And instead of lining up parallel, make two lines of 200 men each. And they would be ordered not to fire, not to do anything. They'd sneak up, blow the bugle, and they would charge. They would all fix bayonets and run full speed. Don't stop and fire, just run. How fast can you run in? How fast can you run 50 yards? I can do it in about 3 seconds. But most people about, 2.5. I'm older now. No, think with gear, holding a rifle, 10 seconds. How many shots can they fire? Once. And if you get on them quick enough, his plan was we charge and then turn both ways and clear out the trench. So basically, just have guys go screaming like this with a bayonet. Ah, like this. Was Corps commander, a guy named Warren, said, Warren, the same guy who the statue for the one I was here, made the little kid cry. He said, try it. And so they waited until about noon on the 11th. Upton's bugler blew. Oh, first off, they need to find what? 2 crazy volunteers. Yeah, this is the first one. And guess what? There's always somebody, right? Who in here? Oh, do it? Yeah, because every musket will be fired at you. Well, they found volunteers. They blew the bugle, and boom, they went. Another thing I think about too, you're running like this with a bayonet and a musket. What if you trip? Okay, so that, no. They got up and totally took the Confederates by surprise. They got one shot off the Confederates, and then they just, they took off running. And they cleared a 50-yard wide bit of the trench. In fact, the first, not just the first guy, the first 5 guys in each line, they weren't hit. They made it. They got to the trench line, but no one thought it was work, so they had no one to exploit the breakthrough, and they were pushed back. Meade heard about it, and now General Upton, he got promoted, got a brigade of 4,000 men to do it for 1,000 men. Lines. And it would go at 1 o'clock on the 12th. And these guys would clear it out, and these guys would just keep going straight. And then 16,000 men under Winfield Scott Hancock, the hero of Gettysburg, they would attack in that hole right here, split the Confederate line. Who knows? It's actually a pretty good idea. They're going to do it here. on this angle, and that's about 100 yards. But it almost worked again. They attacked, they came charging in as fast as they could run, and the first 5 guys weren't hit again. They cleared out the trench line, men came pouring through, it looked perfect, it worked. But Hancock, who was still wounded, his wound would leak for the rest of his life. I'll let you ponder that for a second. But they got lost up here. They could hear shooting, but they couldn't find it for an hour and a half. And by the time they got out to attack, Lee had personally led reinforcements, and now the fighting raged along that trench line. Remember I told you I was a mound? Back and forth for 20 hours they fought on that mound. Back and forth. As mobs of men began pushing all along this line for hours. About 3 or 4 hours into the battle, it began to rain, turning it into just an absolute nightmare. This angle became known as Bloody Angle. And back and forth they fought on Bloody Angle. Okay. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Doing better or still a little off?
I go to the doctor Wednesday. Yeah. Wait,
Back. Yeah.
Bloody Angle is like the 4 lines.
Well, the Confederate line kind of made this like angle like that, so they called it where the attack was. The angle in the Confederate line for Bloody Angle. And there's this mounded dirt, and pretty soon it evolved to this. Just imagine masses of men pushing against these lines. Not really artillery, just masses of men. And guys would be up against this mound, and they would hand muskets to them, and they would kind of stand up and shoot into the faces on the other side, maybe slash their bayonets, then hand their musket back. Someone hand them another loaded one. And if they were wounded or killed, they just went down, and more men just kind of pressed and covered them. Men drowned in the mud when they were wounded and couldn't get out. It was hell on earth. It went back and forth. Bodies piled up. In one 50-foot section of that line, there were 500 bodies. Just mangled. Many of them they couldn't identify the bodies. They were just pieces. In fact, at one spot, this is a Union charge over that line, a 22-inch oak tree. Oh, that's hardwood, was cut in two by musket balls, not cannon, not explosion, bullets. Eventually cut that tree apart. If it could do that to a tree, here's a picture of it, it's at the Smithsonian now. If they could do that to a tree, just imagine what the bodies were like. So that's the picture I took. I'll pass it around the picture. I put it in this file, I'm not trying to prep. But if you look closely, you can see marks in it, great specks. Those are musket balls embedded in the tree. So if you go to Smithsonian, it's there.
Is this in the American history?
Mm-hmm. What did I say?
Yeah, you just said Smithsonian.
Yeah, the Smithsonian Museum of American
I went to
History.
DC and we toured all of them.
No problem. Don't get me wrong, they're great, but if you see too many, you start getting, even if they're great,
You get confused.
and I call it museum fatigue. Yeah.
We were in the American History Museum for 6.5 hours.
That's too long.
Yeah.
In like an hour, even if you love it, an hour, you need a break. Yeah.
Well, it's like 5 stories.
It's huge. And so, finally, the Confederates pulled back, and the Union Army had this line. And at Spotsylvania, finally, when the battle ended, same number of casualties as the Wilderness, almost identical. Another bloodbath. So the Union Army lost another about 18, 19,000. They're getting near 40,000 dead, but the Confederates lost another 13,000. They're running out of men. Interior lines then. Okay. There's another spot here, a smaller battle we're not going to talk about. The Confederates won, and Grant realized it was too hard. And so the race was on to the next spot. You know it's getting closer to Richmond. And the next spot we have to get to, right here, Cold Harbor. And at Cold Harbor, the Confederates won by 3 hours. They beat Union forces. 3 hours. And so in those 3 hours, along a fence, you can see it in this drawing right here, here's that fence. They dug a trench behind it and piled dirt on the fence. It was a fortification they built. A couple miles long. And there was another one of those, it was a farm. a farming area, agriculture area, so there's about a mile of cleared plowed land. So any Union attack would have to be out there for a mile. But Grant and Meade thought, they've lost so many men, the Confederates, and the Union Army got reinforcements. One concerted push and we could win. Under a corps by a guy named Baldy Smith. One reason I tell you, I'll come back to the name. As I understand it, Baldy Smith went bald when he was like 14. And you know he had good friends who immediately dubbed him Baldy, but that's the way it goes. And they decided that was too long to try this attack. And so they did the same thing. The plan was to line up in lines and march at it, just thinking they could overwhelm them. In fact, the lead men were given one man in each lead regiment, a long 15-foot pole with a green flag. So if they got to the Confederate lines, they would wave the flag over the black powder smoke and tell Meade to attack. Or if it didn't work, they wouldn't see the flag. So the plan was, once again, it was another 1 p.m. attack. And the men, all morning and night too, they knew we're going to have to cross this field. Many of them had been in Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, and they also saw what happened to the bodies at the Bloody Angle. Flesh. And so thousands of men took pieces of paper and they wrote their name, their unit, their hometown, and next of kin. Pinned it to them. So if they're nothing but flesh, at least their family will know what happened to them. Because there were thousands of unknown soldiers at the Wilderness and Spotsylvania. Unknown. And so that's what they did. They wrote their last little bit of words. They thought it'd be a slaughter. And at 1 o'clock, they took off for the attack. They were marching towards the Confederate lines. And you played this before. Cannon, then canister, and then gunpowder. In 20 minutes, 7,000 Union soldiers went down. Pre-high explosives. No machine guns. 20 minutes. But someone on Meade's staff claimed he saw the flag. Because he wanted to be the guy who saw the flag. And so Meade ordered more men in. Eventually, about double that number would be killed in about 3 hours. Killed, wounded, or missing in 3 hours. Another slaughter. Cold Harbor was awful. Baldy Smith's corps would never quite be the same. Baldy Smith would never be the same. And here's the deal. In less than a month, the Union had lost over 75,000 men. Killed, wounded, or missing. The Confederates would have lost over half of that number. The Union can't afford that many losses unless their victory is near. But the Confederates are literally out of men. They're out of men. They're scraping men from everywhere.
70,000 men?
Over 75,000. And that's just the Army of the Potomac. They started with 115,000. That means they're always sending more men, and they stripped like all the fortifications around D.C. All those guys went in. They increased the draft age to over 30. But nobody wanted to admit this. But the eventual strategy that's going to be adopted will be attrition. You know what attrition is? Attrition is the way all wars are fought. Nobody likes to admit it, but all wars are fought this way. It's not some brilliant tactical idea. It's this. You kill or maim so many of the enemy. You kill so many and make them suffer so much they eventually what? They have to quit. You kill or maim so many. You make their people suffer. In World War I, they would call it bleeding them white. Kill them, maim them, they gotta quit. If they're out of men, they can no longer fight. If their losses are so awful, they're politically saying, we're done. That's how they fight. And that's why wars are fought today. World War I was attrition. World War II, attrition. Vietnam was attrition. Korea was attrition. Iraq and Afghanistan are attrition. Eventually, one side decides we've given up too much, we've suffered too much, and we quit. But Grant had one more idea. This is right after Cold Harbor. And this is a really good shot. You notice they drug out a bunch of pews out of a local church so they could sit on outside. Here's Grant. So these kind of pictures just no one took back then. He's leaning over Meade's shoulder. You see another face in front of him? It kind of looks like double face because it's kind of two-dimensional. Meade has a map, and Grant's pointing at something. And it very well could be his last effort. maybe I can still win a battle and at least make them quit. And he came up with a good plan. Here they are. Fake an attack here, because what will Lee do if he tries to attack here? And dig trenches. But send most of the men across the James. This is just a fake. Build a huge pontoon bridge of a mile long and attack, and you got to get this down, Petersburg. There's a railway junction. If they could take Petersburg, they couldn't supply Richmond. And that would force Lee's army out and beat them. It's a good plan. But the Confederates had built really elaborate trenches around here, knowing that this was an important city. But remember what I told you? They had to take everybody out of the trenches. They only had a few thousand, they called them stomach soldiers. They were soldiers that had been wounded or sick. That's all they had there. And it almost worked. Almost. The fake attack, Lee dug trenches. Meade got men across a pontoon bridge right here as quickly as possible. That's a pretty cool picture. That's a mile-long pontoon bridge. They got across, and these are what the fortifications looked like. Very elaborate trenches. This is after the war. This is an artillery palisade. I mean, they're incredible trenches. And see these things out here? They call them Chevita free. I always miss. You don't have to write them down. I put it down so I don't forget. Chevita free. See these? This is pre-barbed wire. And they stuck big clumps of these. They go about this side. I think you can see why. People don't like to be impaled. But how would do it like this? Imagine if I'm defending my line here. I put a big clump of those here. I put a big clump of those here. Men attacking, what's going to happen to them? They'll be funneled here, and that's where I have a bunch of cannon with canister. Does that make sense? In World War I, they used barbed wire. Then have them funnel into where machine guns are. So the first corps to arrive there was Baldy Smith, the same guy who attacked at Cold Harbor. And he saw those defenses. And even though he outnumbered the Confederates 5-1, he saw it and thought, oh no, another Cold Harbor, I need reinforcements. He waited almost a full day. In fact, Meade went down and was furious and ordered an attack. And what happened during that delay? Lee arrived, and it was a slaughter. If they would have attacked earlier, who knows? Another one of those what-ifs. They couldn't break it down. They lost so many men. This would devolve into the siege of Petersburg, where both sides dug trenches, soon 2, 3, 4 lines of trenches, artillery fortifications called redoubts. They soon set up, they called them cupolas, where sometimes wood, sometimes they stack up cotton bales or even steel, but they'd stack up these mounds and put a sniper to look over the enemy lines. Anybody who lifted their head above the trenches, they would fire. And some places the trenches were as close as 50 yards apart. If you stuck your head up, you're gone. If you're caught in between the trenches and it's light, you're dead. They would try some attacks over, but neither side could win. This went on from June 64 until April 65. 10 months, the siege of Petersburg. And the line soon spread all the way down to here. The Union Army was not strong enough to totally surround it. The Confederates couldn't push it back. And the fighting went on. Most of the time, the men were stuck in these trenches. Here's a picture of them trying to, like, you can imagine how hot it was. And then every time it would rain, can you imagine what would happen? The trenches would fill up with water and mud. But where are the bathrooms, the latrines? There's just holes dug there. So what's going to happen? They're going to flood. So that'll be everywhere. There's going to be dead humans, dead horses all over. Just miserable. So you're going to be bored out of your skull, mixed in with moments of total terror. And so this is a picture from Hartford showing men trying to alleviate the tension. Here they're playing poker, but a popular game was to stick a hat on a bayonet. And they would stick it up and they would wager on how many bullet holes would be in the hat in, let's say, 10 seconds. And this went on month after month. Soon they would get a name for that area between the trench lines. No? They called it the same thing in World War I. No man's land. Have you heard that? That's from Petersburg. So the thing was, by July, after 4 weeks of this, they realized we can't go over. What if we go under? Some miners, they were recruited from Western Pennsylvania, they're hard rock coal miners, and they said, hey, we can dig a tunnel under our line, under no man's line, and under the Confederate works, the Confederate trenches. And this is as old as warfare has been. That's how you get rid of a castle wall. You know how you get rid of a castle wall? You go under it, you dig the dirt out, and so the castle then is, and then you put logs underneath to hold the castle wall up. And then you light the logs on fire. Collapses. That's called undermining. So have you ever heard something called a landmine? It comes from that. And that's their plan. Now, their corps commander, the same General Burnside we mentioned before, it's Burnside's back. Burnside at first was like, dig, better than gambling. But when after a couple of weeks, when it worked, they figured out a way to dig and the Confederates didn't know, and they were 25 feet under the Confederates. He told Meade, and Meade was excited, because the plan was to dig 50 yards in each direction, and then roll 300 tons of black powder. Blow it up, undermine their line, attack in that hole. Pretty good idea, isn't it? And it looked like they had a plan for July 17th, 1864. In fact, here's a great picture of them. They'd haul the dirt out at night so the Confederate spies couldn't see they were digging. And here they are rolling gunpowder down the tunnel. And they had a ran out of time. Just imagine a really exciting story. Okay, tomorrow, I'll finish it tomorrow. Good story. We'll do the election and the war, start Reconstruction, and then it's test day. Oh, by the way, tomorrow, don't forget it's dress up day. Friday at lunch, you know, I am going to show the Festivus documentary, AKA the greatest Seinfeld episode ever. Don't look into the light. Don't look into the light. Oh, I didn't see it with crutches. Yeah, how'd it go?
It went good. They actually went in there and did some more than I thought, because they saw that my meniscus tear the last time didn't heal.
It's amazing what they can do now, though. Just one hole, how many holes?
I don't know, I haven't seen it yet. It's still wrapped
How's it
up.
feel?
Really good. Way better than my last one. I got in the truck, like after the surgery.
Oh, that's great. I mean, you know.
Yeah, it's just a little unsteady, so they want me to crutches for a
How much longer you have to be in crutch? How long the crutches?
Oh, just a couple days, and then I'll be walking around on the brace. And so, yeah, it worked out really well.
That's it. Well, I'm glad. Well, hopefully, yeah. Because it's been bugging for a year, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, what are you doing here? Hi, everybody. Took me a second. I was a little bit overwhelmed.
No, I just really don't like what you're saying.
We're going last day in the live. Live buried. Just one sec. Well, that's great. really hungry. Woo! Oh boy. I forgot to hand this back.